Uh, Hi, Donna. Welcome to the Debrief. It's so good to see you. Excited to chat today. Uh,
Thank
I'm going to do
you.
a quick intro. Yeah, this is the Debrief presented by Bright Hire. The Debrief is a series of conversations with founders, executives, and talent thought leaders about hiring and building high-performing teams. I'm your host, Teddy Chestnut, co-founder of Bright Hire, and today I am thrilled to welcome our guest, Donna Morris, Executive Vice President and Chief People Officer at Walmart. Donna, again, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Teddy, thanks very much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic. So we are going to talk about your career journey. We're going to go back in time a little bit, your reflections on hiring, building teams, inclusive hiring, and your perspective on the future of HR and AI and how AI is shaping opportunities, risks, and the landscape ahead. So lots of ground to cover, but I thought we might start with a couple quick warm-up questions. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay. What was the last thing that you bought at Walmart?
Oh, 4 umbrellas, and not just one, but four, because I am in New York right now and it's been extremely rainy. And I have gone through, I've frankly gone through 2 umbrellas in 4 days because of wind and rain. So I decided I was going to always have a backup. And it was very easy and very accessible. So I ordered four so that I have a good supply.
I was thinking like four for like you and what three other people were you ordering for? But no, this is like I need the back. It's like I know I'm going to lose one of these and one's going to end up in a
I
cab.
know
So
something's going to happen, and or a family member or friend's going to want it. So I'm going to have four. And yep, they're coming today. So I'm excited.
prepared. What was your very first job?
My very first job was at a dry cleaners. I was 13 years old. It was not child labor. That was permissible in Canada at the point in time. And it was my part time job. So I worked on Wednesdays and Saturdays and every second Thursday after school. And big props to my dad because it was close to my house, but not close enough that at night when it was dark that I should walk. So my dad would pick me up and sometimes he would help me sort of close shop, which was great.
That's really cool. You either now hate folding clothes or love folding clothes. Which
My
one?
husband is a far better folder of the clothes, Teddy, than I am for sure. And you're right. It probably, and I also never go to a dry cleaner anymore. I either
Right.
get it picked up or else my husband's kind enough to drop it off. So you're right. I think
Um,
I have an aversion now. But my
you
second
got
job was a drugstore, and I still love going to a drugstore. And hey, Walmart has great cosmetic and drugstore needs too. So it's all worked out well.
nice, nice. If you weren't doing what you were doing right now, and you've had obviously a long career in HR, but if you weren't doing that, what would be your dream job? What would you be doing?
I think if I wasn't doing that, I'd either love to do interior decorating or big time real estate and or teaching. So those are very, very different things. I agree.
I was
But I think if it was truly a passion project, it would be something more creative like interior decorating and or house selling or something like that. Fixer to
I was
fabulous, something fabulous.
okay. I was really trying to come up on the fly with like a thread that connected those three, and that was drawing a blank. Uh,
No, no, probably not
is
possible, Teddy. That's okay.
No, that's all right. Is there anything that you're listening to or reading right now that you like love and want to put out into the world?
I just today had Jenna Fisher, who wrote a book called To the Top, and it's a book about women's leadership. And she was fantastic. So if you haven't read it, I think it's a good read. And I also recently read Ginny Rometty's book, Good Power, and it's actually a very, very
Mm,
good read too. So those are two that come top of mind.
very cool. All right, last kind of warm up question here. What's your favorite interview question?
Ooh, I always ask people if I was to meet someone that has worked for you, what will they tell me about you?
Mm,
And it's very open ended, but what I really want to hear is just how they articulate how they think they show up to someone else that they've worked with or has worked for them. And it's often very telling in terms of just who they are as a leader and how they might contribute to our environment here at Walmart, which is really a people-led company that's tech-powered, and we're an omni-channel retailer focused on helping people save money to live better. So there's a humility, a respect for the individual that's super important. And so that question tends to be my go-to.
Very cool. We'll come back to that one. Before we do, let's go like way back. So you started your HR career, city of Ottawa, in Canada, a number of Canadian-based companies, Rogers, Fulcrum Software, Celio, which I think was acquired by Adobe, and then spent almost 2 decades there. What were some of the formative experiences kind of early on in that HR career that kind of laid the foundation for your trajectory? Were stretch roles or situations you got thrown into that maybe you weren't ready for? But when you think about the kind of the inflection points in your career, what were some of those?
Yeah, arcs of the career. I had a lot of experiences early on with acquisitions, and so much of the success of an acquisition is all about planning for people, who's going to get integrated, how they're going to get integrated, what those onboarding plans look like, the cultural assessment. And so when I was at Adobe early on, before I became at the overall CHRO, having those types of experiences were great. And then I had the chance to actually start new locations in different parts around the globe. Romania, we stood up. India, we rapidly expanded. We acquired companies that were in different parts of Europe. And so all of those, I think, were pivotal to really being agile and always being open to learn in different environments.
Fascinating. So collective bargaining, international experience, M&A, kind of touch like the wealth and breadth of like everything that you get in HR. Was there ever a role that you got put into where you thought, I'm not ready to be in this role? Like I shouldn't be in this role yet.
I think there's almost always a benefit from being in those stretch roles when you're sort of like, oh my gosh, I could almost be over my skis type of an analogy. If I roll back the tape earlier to my career, I was a compensation analyst, and I remember being fairly effective with working with groups to really understand roles, but I was really not very effective on the spreadsheet. And I had a colleague who was fantastic, and she could build every macro known to mankind. And then there was me and my basic spreadsheet. So that was one of those times when I realized, like, even if I'm in a weak area, I'm only going to ever be mediocre. Whereas the areas that you're stronger, you can be so much brighter and better. And I think that was a pivotal crossroad that, wow, I could be a generalist or I could be a specialist. It was really great to get that experience, but I knew that if I was going to be a specialist, it probably leaned more towards being with people on a regular basis. So the talent related areas. So I guess what that would tell you is seek out opportunities where you're not as comfortable, because they'll often reiterate where you really have strengths and where, frankly, you're not as strong. And that's where you have to hire people and buffer your gaps.
Yeah, I was going to roll right into it. Was kind of not on the interview plan, but it's a fascinating concept. How do you think about that as an influence to your perspective on building teams and individual hiring? Like, I'm assessing for this person, this idea of they might spike in one area but not in others. How has that shaped how you've kind of architected teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's the what and a how to a job. And I actually find often the how is more important. So is the person going to be a cultural fit for your organization? Are they going to bring diverse views and perspectives to the team? Do they demonstrate the leadership expectations that you have as an organization? Some of that is more hardwired than actually I'll call it the composite skills of the job. And so clearly I look for individuals that have the requirements for the job, the skills, but do they have to be the utmost expert? Sometimes the individuals that are stronger in how they work and how they would work with the team and the diverse perspectives that they might bring, sometimes could end up being the stronger individual, because all of us are always going to be learning the what of the job, because things change, technology changes, requirements changes, organizations change. And so I have found that it's often better to get somebody that behaviorally will fit your organization and will be very open to learning and adapting than getting somebody that's really, really hardwired, that has lots of expertise, but might not be as much of an organizational fit.
When you think about culture fit or actually organizational fit, which is maybe a more interesting way to describe it, what are the actual elements that you would characterize as like the contours of organizational fit? Like, what are you actually testing for? What are you looking for?
Yeah, so here at Walmart, we definitely do some assessments for a number of our roles that really are focused on more of those behavioral components. But if I was to step back, we have a set purpose, and that's to help people save money so that they can live better. We have set values that are really important to us, which include that service orientation to our customers, respecting the individual, acting with integrity, really being a change agent, somebody that's open to change. And so I'm really looking for how much does somebody align with what our purpose is, and how could they actually navigate within the values that we have as an organization. Clearly, you want the individual to be able to be successful in their job. So there's a baseline of skills, but more importantly, can they be agile? Will they continue to lean into learning? Because all of our roles continue to evolve.
Really interesting. Yeah, one thing that you've talked about a lot in the context of Walmart is always learning, and associates can start in one role, but almost never kind of leave Walmart in that same role, right? The career paths are kind of multitudinous. It's hard for hiring managers sometimes, especially more junior ones, to think about hiring for the next role or the career path or the potential versus the role that I need to fill today. It seems like you've, in some respects, cracked that. How have you scaled across all of that tens of thousands of hiring managers that you have at Walmart, an orientation toward hiring, for the second or the third or the fourth job? Like, what have you had to do to instill that?
Well, I think, Teddy, we're really just focused on having our hiring managers and frankly the hiring teams being focused on having the individuals successful in the job that they're being hired for. And I think our hope is that when that happens in the right manner and an individual is supported in terms of how they're onboarded into the company, then it's the responsibility more collectively across the enterprise to reinforce that we can be a path of opportunity for individuals. Because in fairness to a hiring manager, you're correct to say they can't be the advocate for everything. But what they can do is make sure that they hire people that align to our purpose and our values, that demonstrate the interest in the job that they're coming in for today. And then that same manager plays a big role in managing performance expectations, making sure that they're set, giving people feedback, having the opportunity to have a career growth and development discussion. And then we need to make it easier as an enterprise for associates to learn about other roles and how their current skills and capabilities and frankly behaviors could match to those opportunities.
That makes sense. It's almost like a lesser burden that you put on the individual hiring manager. I don't have to hire for potential and define that in some way. It's like, no, just hire for this role.
Hire for this role.
Ensure they're successful, and then go from there.
Exactly. I think each of us play a role of being a player and a coach. A player meaning we each have our own jobs to do, but in the responsibility of being a manager, then we have to coach other people for success in their current job, and then hopefully where they might go next in terms of their career.
Really helpful. Going just back to your personal journey, it looks very up and to the right, right? It's like, promotion after promotion after promotion. If you actually kind of charted it out, does it look like that? Where there like, squiggles, where there, swirls around, where there's, troughs and then peaks? Like, what did it actually look like over the last,
it's kind to think that it's a continued sort of rise, but the reality is absolutely they were steps across. I think the biggest example is I worked for a company called Excelio that was acquired by Adobe. And at Excelio, I was the CHRO, Chief People Officer. I reported to the CEO. We were a small company. We were $100 million in revenue. We had around 700 employees. At the time, Adobe was 3,200 employees, around $1 billion in revenue. And I went from being in that top job to being a senior director. Now, a lot of people wouldn't probably do that because they would say, well, why am I going to take a title level and I'm going to go down? Well, my strong perspective was I'm not going down when I'm continuing to learn. I'm going to go to a company that's a whole different scale, in a different country, and I'm going to get to learn that experience. But I think if I really fixated on title, I wouldn't have done that, Teddy. And it was probably the best unlock to my career that led me to how I continued to grow at Adobe, for which I was very fortunate. And that led me to Walmart. And so what I would reinforce is don't be focused on title, be focused on the opportunity to make impact and the opportunity to continue to learn in your career. And then I would say even prior to that, I had experiences where I was taking lateral, but to go into a different specialty. So for instance, I did do the total rewards job, and then I left and I took a lateral to actually go and become an HR generalist or an HR business partner, which gave me different experiences. But if I looked at job level, they were equal. It wasn't like it was another step above. It was just different experiences.
In those lateral roles, if you put yourself in the shoes of the hiring manager, looking at your experience and background and resume, like what percentage of the job that you were applying for, do you think that hiring manager thought, yep, Donna's got all that covered? Like how much of even it was a stretch were those lateral moves? And I'm curious, like what how you presented yourself as a candidate to be attractive to those roles where it wasn't a clear kind of linear next step.
I think so much of it first is, I would always encourage everyone to always think that you have the shot to put your hat in the ring. And we can sometimes learn as much from the jobs you don't get than the jobs that you actually are successful in going for. If I had to reflect back on the time, it was probably like a 70-30, 80-20 situation whereby, yeah, I had transferable skills and capabilities that would check a fair amount of boxes. But there were other areas that I never did have that direct experience. And I always try to encourage people, particularly when you're early to mid-career, is you shouldn't be expected to check every box. If you did, you'd be in the hiring manager seat. So don't be hard on yourself. Make sure that you lean into the opportunity and try to piece together what experiences might be proximate to what it is that they're looking for, even if it's not the exact same.
I imagine you also felt like that when you moved from Adobe to Walmart, right? It wasn't like, retail to retail, right? I'm sure that there were foundations that felt they were similar, maybe global exposure and others, but I'm curious if you could talk us through how much of a stretch did that feel? Where did you already have the foundations to show up in that role and own it? And what was different about moving from, tech to, multimodal, B2C?
Yes, great question. Well, I came to Walmart for two key reasons. Such a big opportunity to make an impact on people's lives with over 2.1 million associates that work for us, and a huge digital transformation to serve our customers. And then fast forward, we had the pandemic. Literally, as I started, it had hit in China. The scale, I'm not going to lie, that from afar was what worried me the most. Is I was, even knowing I left Adobe at around 25,000 employees, it's like 25,000. It wasn't even the size of our global tech team. And so that was pretty daunting. But what I realized was there were so many similarities. Walmart moves with speed. It's super innovative. It's highly productive. And a lot of those attributes came from the sector that I came from. And I realized that I was also a core customer because, frankly, I love retail and I like to shop, and I like to shop online, and I also go to stores. And so I think some of that made it easier to adjust, even knowing I hadn't directly come from the same sector. And if I rolled back the tape really far, I worked for a drugstore for 8 years as a part-time student. And that was very much a frontline job. And so I guess tying everything together, the culmination of experiences that I was really fortunate to have in my career led me to Walmart. And now I'm like, absolutely, that all equated. But there were times, Teddy, that I was like, wow, there's so many people. How am I going to navigate this?
Yeah.
And in fact, the people team that I'm fortunate to partner with and have on the team is bigger than all of Adobe was when I started
Nice.
Adobe. So that in itself was like,
That's wild.
oh, I got to get my head around that. But yeah, it was great.
That you mentioned the jump in scale. I mean, literally orders of magnitude from Adobe to Walmart. Is there anything about your approach to or philosophy around hiring that has actually changed now operating at that scale, or are the foundations kind of really the same?
Well, I think a few things. One is, as quickly referenced, Walmart, we really do believe in assessments. We believe that they remove some of the bias associated with hiring processes. And so our frontline associates, we use assessments for in our stores and our clubs, and we do for a number of areas. And frankly, my past, we hadn't. So that's been a big learning, and it really contributes to quality of hiring and frankly, the ability to have a really diverse set of associates that work for us, which is great. So that's one. Two is how you can leverage technology to actually be really effective in your hiring process. And you're coming from that space, which is wonderful. And I think that there is so much opportunity ahead for us in terms of how we leverage technology effectively in some of our people processes. And so I think we're going to see more of that ahead. And it might be surprising given that I had spent the time that I did in a technology company, but some of those practices were not as automated and not as digital, even knowing the company was digital. And so I think that has unlocked a lot of potential for us to be really effective in our hiring practices.
One thing that's unique about Walmart is, I mean, truly every candidate could be a customer.
Correct.
And then certainly in the high volume roles, I'm curious, delivering an exceptional candidate experience is hard, even if you're a company of our size, right? Thinking about, trying to put the white gloves on and make sure that people come out of that experience feeling great, whether they got the job or not. What has your team had to do? What have you maybe candidly struggled with in terms of delivering an exceptional candidate experience to, I mean, how many applicants do you get on an annual basis? I can't even fathom.
Well, that would be a lot. But if I was to step back, I think it's something that's always a work in progress, Teddy, because to your great point, everyone for which we have the privilege of talking about an opportunity inherently could be a customer of ours. And, we also look and we know that we have a very high percentage of associates that have worked for Walmart that have gained great experiences and they go on to work for other incredible brands across this country and across the markets that we work for. And we hope that the experiences that they've had while working at Walmart have contributed to actually the success that they have in other areas. And so I think that's really important to note. So what have we done specific to the experience? We're continuing to learn, equipping our managers and our hiring teams to be really effective and really making sure that they think of it as an experience and they think about the time that they're spending with individuals and that they use that time wisely. And we value that the time that people spend with us, that they leave with a great impression, that if nothing else, they learn about themselves through the process and they learn about the company is, I think, really critical. I think this is an area whereby it's always going to be a balance between how much technology you apply to it and how much real human you apply. And as a company, given we're people-led, tech-powered, we do always want to lean into the people aspect of it and really make sure that people know that they've had a chance to actually participate and engage with another associate that works for us.
That phrase that you use, people-led, tech-powered, what are some of the examples that have showed up in the last maybe 12 months or so? Certainly in the recruiting and hiring side, but maybe more broadly across your HR kind of strategy or tech stack that embody that idea of people-led, tech-powered?
Yeah, so we have built an app called MeAt, and it started with our frontline associates, and it was launched during the pandemic where we really ramped up curbside and delivery. But we didn't want the app just to be a work-based tool to help people actually navigate their work, but we wanted it to also be a tool that would unlock the potential in people's lives. And so we use it to do things like bring information and insights to our associates about their schedules, about their medical plans, about career opportunities, about development opportunities. And now we've launched what we call Me at Campus for our campus based associates that work in our offices. And similarly, we've built a generative AI platform within Mia, which we call My Assistant, which think of it as an internal chat GPT like feature that can accelerate some of the work that people do. Think of it as being used using a prompt to assist with drafting a communication or drafting a job specification or drafting um, specs for a new product. Our viewpoint is how do we actually give tools that make people really effective? Why is that important? Because we want people to lead with their humanity, and we want to frankly enable their ability to do that with technology and digital. And so we're continuing to look at ways to really unlock people's potential using digital tools.
I love the scope of the mission for me at not just like a work productivity tool, but like unlocking people's potential. Just the chutzpah of the aspiration is like pretty cool. What, you mentioned AI as a core kind of component of the MeAt app. In your take, kind of where are we in the hype cycle of AI for HR?
I think I think we're early only because we need to show tangible examples of how it can get integrated into key workflows to actually change how we do work. Um, but I'm going to say it isn't hype. It's real. It's real. You know, we're seeing it already. When I look at the adoption of My Assistant, the people team here at Walmart is actively leaning in to do things like summarize meetings, help with prompts of first drafts of communications and job descriptions, etc. And I think over the next year, we can expect that it'll be actively embedded in a lot of enterprise tools that people will interact with, or, you know, our everyday enterprise tools like Microsoft Office and the launch of Copilot and how we think about it. So the hype, let's remove it and realize that a lot of it is dependent upon content, and that can't be made up. So
Sure.
you still need to have the back end of great data and great content. And I believe the promise for the people function is we've long wanted to have self-service. And finally, we might end up being in a situation where we can provide increased opportunities for self-service by virtue of actually using generative AI for people to find information that they want to find on their own. Like, who really wants to get in touch with someone to find out what my benefits are for something, or how I go about applying for something? All of that is literally like a short time away. I mean, we're launching a benefit assistant very soon here at Walmart, and I know a lot of other companies are likely looking at how they can actually integrate more of the capabilities into their core workflows.
That's very cool. Um, how do you think all of that kind of unlock is going to change the role, the day to day of your HRBP, your HR generalist, your recruiter? Like, there's a lot of talk about how these roles are going to look very different 2, 3, 5 years from now. I'm curious if you share that perspective, and if you already have a sense of kind of like what work gets taken away, what opportunities get opened up, what kinds of skills do the folks in those roles need in order to be successful in the future of what that profession looks like.
I think increasingly the function is being on a path of requiring more depth around business and really being the partners for business unlock. I look at activities like organizational design, organizational capability building, talent management. I think all of those become even more important. But the takeaway is the administrivia, the
Mm-hmm.
once again self-service functionality. I think the unlock of insights from data really becomes the reality that all of us have wanted for a long time. That will all be aided by generative AI. What concern that I would have 3 to 5 years from now is, if I look at my own arc of my career and the learning, it came from doing a lot of the grindy. And so I
Mm-hmm.
worry of, where do you get that grindy experience in a world that some of that actually can be automated? So that's like a deeper thought that I
Yeah.
have, back to maybe wanting to be a teacher, is like, you actually have to make sure that people get those experiences so that they can
Yeah.
build from those on some of the increased areas of specialization. That all being said, work has always been on a trajectory of change. I just think this
Mm-hmm.
is the next element of change. I think we've long been a function that could benefit from automation, and I think we're on to that now.
Lights out. Just
Lights, yeah,
cut it right
see
there. Lights
everything.
out. Drop the
Yeah.
mic. That's it. Um, Along those, there's a question I love to ask. And your reference to teaching brought it to mind, which is a really interesting consideration around the use of ChatGPT and AI by candidates in prep for job interviews.
Mm.
Right? You have hiring managers and TA leaders actually more concerned that maybe answers are being drafted ahead of time or those sorts of things. And there's another take, which is like ChatGPT is like a calculator. It's a tool. I'm curious your take on like candidates using ChatGPT to prep for interviews. Like calculator, cheating, somewhere in the mix. Where do you draw the line? Yeah,
The way
yeah.
I look at it is, I think of it more as a calculator. Is That's the role of each of us as organizations and as hiring professionals and hiring leaders, to say, yes, everybody can prepare in the way that they choose to prepare, but the real experiences show up with the person. And so, what I
Mm,
would say is, you can lean into make it an extremely automated process without actually having any human interaction. But if you make
mm.
it a real human interaction, then usually the calculator doesn't show up, or usually, I'm not going to be referring to my ChatGPT mobile app so that I can actually get the
Right,
answer. So
right.
I'm pretty cool with it.
All right. Shifting gears a little bit, inclusion is one of the four strategic priorities that you've mentioned that you're focused on at Walmart. Again, the scale, the scope, the breadth, the diversity of roles that you hire for and regions that you hire for. How have you had to think about inclusion as a pillar from a hiring perspective at Walmart, given that context?
Yeah, we've really continued to evolve too, Teddy, because now we're realizing it's more belonging that we have to create,
Mm,
and that an outcome of that can be diversity, equity, and inclusion. To your point, I think that too is an ongoing journey. I mean, creating the environment where everybody can bring their authentic self and can really feel like they can contribute based on that. I will say it's a lot easier if you show up to your respective job, wherever that is, and feel like it's not a different version of who you are. And
mm,
so, starting with, how do you provide an environment where people just feel safe and they feel like they can be trusted? And, we in HR like to use a lot of HR speak. So we'll say, how do you prepare the environment to be psychologically safe? But I think the main thing
hmm
is how can you create the environment where people feel like they can be trusted and that there is trust, so that they can bring who they uniquely are to the table. When you
hmm
think of the ability to make a big impact, you realize that you want to bring all kinds of perspectives. At Walmart, we're really fortunate to serve literally over 230 million customers a week, and each of those customers have unique needs. And as an employer, we want to make sure that we represent what our customers
hmm
look like. And that is a broad scale of very different backgrounds and experiences and cultures and representation. And so, how do we ensure we're creating the environment where all of those associates can come and bring their best selves and contribute their ideas that ultimately serve our customers and members?
Are there any like non-negotiables or like really strict guidelines that you've given to your teams as it relates to ensuring that the hiring process and the recruiting process represents those values?
What I would say is we're really focused on ensuring that we're extremely inclusive of our practices. So, are those hiring teams diverse themselves? Do we
Mm,
actually look at a diverse group of candidates? Are we really being inclusive of how we think about sourcing individuals? Aside from that, we equip our managers actively. We have a managerial academy for all of our frontline
mm,
associates, for all of our campus associates. We have onboarding programs. We take the role of the manager extremely seriously because truly our people do make the difference. And that is something that
mm.
culturally is very important to Walmart. And so, in that belief, we know that there's rigor that's required to make sure that we're really providing that opportunity for everyone to be their best.
Uh, Thinking back on your own experience, you mentioned actually, that you felt like you had maybe 70%, maybe 80% of kind of the coverage for roles that you applied for. Um, and there's been research done that women are less likely to put their name in the hat when they feel like they have a lower percentage of coverage. Um, uh, how do you think about creating an environment where that comfort, that confidence can be there across all of your associates? Again, when you think about, belonging, inclusion, your own personal experience, and research like that, all coming together. If you want to get the best out of people, right? They have to put their name in the hat. Is there anything that you've done or that you've seen work along those lines?
No, I think it's hard, Teddy. I mean, definitely this is an area I think where technology and automation can really help because if you think
Mm,
of like the 70 or 80% rule, if I'm getting recommendations based on that, even 60, 70, or 80% plus
mm,
of roles that I could go for, that in itself actually is confidence building, right? Because all of a sudden it's like,
mm,
oh, I wasn't thinking of, but if if in fact I'm being prompted, that gives me the opportunity to open that door and or to learn what else is required, meaning what
mm,
skills could I develop for which I have a gap. I think setting the tone and frankly making sure that people have those open discussions. I know that I feel I have a responsibility to share openly that if a person was had all 10 attributes that they were looking for, once again they'd probably be the person hiring as opposed to the person going for it.
mm.
So much of it is cultivating an environment where people really do feel safe that they can go for what they want. And I do think our managers play a big role, but I think leaders set the overall tone for the
Mm.
organization, and I think that's where it becomes very, very important.
What you shared about the technology piece is really interesting. You were describing basically, if I have technology like internal mobility that's recommending jobs for me, or maybe even on an external platform like LinkedIn or
Correct.
something like that, right? What's the breadth of roles that I'm seeing as a candidate? There's a flip side on that too, which is if we're going to use sorting or screening technology, and I'm going to only put in front of hiring managers a 10 out of 10, that's going to close the door to a whole host of candidates that might be a great fit.
Exactly. And that's where I would push back and say, when you're looking at that matching, is always leave room for the, I'll call it always leave room for the gray aspects, which is
Mm-hmm.
nobody's going to perfectly check the box. So how do you make sure that you're opening yourself to see how somebody presents themselves with their skills and capabilities and frankly their behaviors, how they align with your
Mm-hmm.
organizational values and your beliefs.
To take that kind of approach is sometimes a bit of a risk, and you don't always get it right. I'm curious if you reflect on, a hiring mistake or two that you've made in your career. Uh, what went wrong? What were the things that if you went back you would change about how you ran the process?
I like to think, Teddy, all the hires were perfect, but in truth,
You'd be the first one I've ever interviewed where I was
exactly,
like, I
exactly,
never
yeah.
missed.
Truth be told, Teddy, when it doesn't work, it's not about the what; it's always about the how. And what I have found is the individuals, when it doesn't work, it's because they're just not a fit for the organization. They're not willing to potentially adapt, and it's not about assimilating into a company, it's about integrating. I truly believe it's about bringing the best of, and it ends up being a 1 plus 1 equals 3, but there also has to be the ability to adapt to a new environment, and sometimes people just aren't. And so what I would say is making sure that you're using behavioral based interviews. Past performance is a great indicator of what will lie ahead for individuals. And I think it's important to really explore how people have navigated in the past to indicate what they will do for you in the future.
Mm, super helpful. And maybe if that person's coming from a different context, really understanding like how did they learn, how did they change, what new environment did they adapt to before? Because
Absolutely.
that was the downside of the behavioral based interview would be prior success in a very different context does not translate to success here.
Correct, correct. And so really making sure that ideally you're doing that with almost like a simulation of, but have you seen it in these situations? Or
Mm,
how might you adjust based on your circumstances? I think is really important. And, you know, depending upon the environment, just seeing how they might show up in the regular flow. Often we'll take individuals sometimes to walk a store or to see a
mm,
distribution center, and these individuals won't actually work in our store or our distribution centers. But it's very insightful to see how they might show up in a different setting as opposed to an office setting. And so, depending
mm.
upon what your environment is seeing how they adaptive they are to a different environment can tell you a lot about an individual.
Super helpful advice. I love just the idea that when you miss, it's almost always on the how, not the what. That's really useful. Um, at the beginning of this conversation, you said that your favorite interview question was, if someone asked you or asked someone who worked for you to describe you, how would they describe you? Uh, if I asked somebody who worked for you how they would describe you, how would they describe you?
I like to believe, Teddy, that they'd say is what you see is what you get, that I'm very approachable, that I'm very positive, that I've got a lot of energy, that I really like to innovate and make an impact, and that people would say that I'm just one of the team.
Thank you for letting me put you on the spot like that. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Um, if folks want to learn more about you, your work, your philosophy, is there like a spot in the world on the internet or in the interwebs where they should go to learn
Teddy, I
more?
have a newsletter that's called Making a Difference, which is on LinkedIn. And I am very active on that platform. So LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me.
Awesome. Donna Morris, EVP and Chief People Officer of Walmart. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a super
Thank
fun
you.
conversation. I learned a
Thank
lot, covered a
you.
lot of ground. Yeah, it was
Awesome.
great. Thank you.
Thank you, Teddy. You're a great interviewer.
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.